the aftermath of the loss of the French and Indian War by the French, they were forced to concede control of the Ohio River Valley to the British. This opened up far more land for British settlers to begin to move west. Prior to and during this valley's acquisition by the French, the lands surrounding the Ohio River were controlled by the Iroquois Confederacy, more specifically the Shawnee, Cayuga, and Seneca tribes. These tribes had hunted the lands around the Ohio River and certainly had no intention of giving up their hunting rights. With more and more settlers setting their eye on the new lands in the west, the native tribes became increasingly resentful. In 1773, Daniel Boone, the soon-to-be famous hunter, led an expedition into what is now Kentucky along with about 50 others, including his 16-year-old son, in an attempt to establish a settlement. While out foraging for supplies one day, James Boone, Henry Russell, the son of the future Revolutionary War officer William Russell, and several others were captured by a group of Indians from the Delaware, Shawnee, and Cherokee tribes. To show their opposition to Boone's settlement, this group of young men and boys were brutally tortured and killed. Needless to say, their display certainly worked, and Boone's settlement and expedition quickly fell apart. With the increase of these brutal attacks on settlers, John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore and governor of the Virginia colony, appealed to the Virginia House of Burgesses to declare war on these Indian tribes. The House agreed, and the militia was called out to march to the Ohio Valley and calm the tension there. This is the beginning of Lord Dunmore's War, of which the Battle of Point Pleasant was the only violent encounter. Lord Dunmore amassed an army of over 2,500 militiamen split into two groups. The first group, led personally by Dunmore, marched from Williamsburg, Virginia, to Fort Pitt, also known as present-day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then down the Ohio River. The second group, led by Andrew Lewis, who was colonel of the militia during the French and Indian War, marched from Williamsburg to Camp Union, or present-day Lewisburg, West Virginia, and then marched to Point Pleasant, where the Kanawha River meets the Ohio. The plan was for Dunmore and Lewis to meet at Point Pleasant and then proceed to cross the Ohio River into Indian Territory. Lewis arrived before Dunmore, erected a camp, and made preparations to cross the river. Meanwhile, the leader of the Shawnee, Chief Cornstalk, knew of Lewis's plan to cross the river thanks to his many hunting parties that were sent out. He set up a plan to cross the Ohio from their territory and ambush Lewis and his men before they had the chance to cross. His plan was almost entirely successful, and he would have completely annihilated the militiamen if he hadn't been spotted by a group that had gone hunting early in the morning. Assuming this was a small band of Indians intending to harass them, Lewis had sent out 2 detachments of 150 men led by his brother, Colonel Charles Lewis, and Colonel William Fleming. Our scenario for the Battle of Point Pleasant begins after the Indian force has been spotted and the militia is dispatched to fight. The game today is being played in 15mm using the Ganesha Games rules Song of Drums and Tomahawks. They are very quick to learn and are a perfect set of rules for playing out battles of the various Indian wars from 1609 to 1880. As to not bog down the game, each pair of figures is being counted as a single figure. In the early morning on October 10th, Cornstalk and his Indian warriors let out their war whoops and begin to move through the forest draped in a thick fog. Soon they encounter the lead elements of the force Lewis had sent to stop them. The militia begin the battle with the crack of musket fire breaking the peaceful morning. Despite the fog, their aim is true, and Chief Cornstalk is minorly wounded and knocked to the ground. The Indians begin to return fire, bringing Colonel Fleming into their sights, but with the fog, they miss their chance to strike him down. As more Indians move up through the forest, they begin to return fire at the militia. Chief Cornstalk is able to get up after his minor wound, as some of his warriors manage to hit the militiamen moving out in the open. Hearing the gunfire from the camp, Lewis then dispatches the rest of his men to reinforce the detachments deployed earlier. These men rush through the forest in an attempt to reach their comrades before they are overrun. They are able to reach them in time, and the first casualty of the game comes when the militia officer steps around the tree with a well-aimed pistol shot. Both sides continue the slugfest through the trees. Lead balls whiz through the air, either finding their mark in a tree trunk, loud thwack, or the flesh of the enemy. As more men from the militia begin to fall, one of the warriors lets out a loud cry as he rushes to claim the scalp of his most recent kill. With the speed of a deer and the agility of a hare, he manages to claim the scalp without a single scratch. He returns to his cover behind a large oak, eager to hopefully claim another prize. As the battlefield begins to become more and more obscured by powder smoke and fog, the battle begins to devolve into a brutal close-range and melee bloodbath. Another warrior charges in, letting out his war cry as he brandishes his tomahawk. The militia fire at the charging warrior, but he's moving too fast, and both shots land harmlessly among the trees. He leaps onto the doomed militiaman and with a quick flurry of strikes, dispatches the man and claims another scalp. With the battlefield now almost being completely obscured, nearly half their number lost, and Colonel Lewis wounded, the militia retreat back to their camp, most likely to soon be overrun by Cornstalk and his warriors. Unlike the historical events where the militia were able to defeat Cornstalk and pacify the Ohio Valley temporarily, the loss of Lewis's force camped at Point Pleasant in our game most likely would have ended Dunmore's expedition into the Shawnee Territory. As Lewis, commanding about half of the militia force sent to the Ohio, this would have been completely devastating to the expedition. This would have led to continued aggression from the Indians toward American settlers moving into the land. The failure to defeat these tribes in the valley also would have meant fighting a difficult two-front war early on in the Revolution, making for the defeat of the budding nation much more of a possibility.